British were god-awful because they have the worst imperial mentality of any country in the world. So Britain industrialized first, roughly 1700, and then the difference of economic might was translated into geopolitical imperial power, and then went overseas and kicked the shit out of the rest of the world, basically. It completely colonized Indian subcontinent. It invaded China in 1839. Britain went in and took over much of Africa and took over much of America, of course, the
Also
Indian.
Cyprus.
And the first rule of empire is you extract from your colonies, you take the resources away, you keep them poor, and you keep them uneducated also. All that empire, they didn't want to give schools, they didn't want to educate anybody. So literacy rates in 1950, 5%. In some countries, with 4 or 5 people with a high school education out of millions. And since education is the main route to economic development, colonies everywhere just fell farther and farther behind. So as technology had improved in Europe, it had not really improved in the colonies. There it was plantations and mining, extracting resources, not building industry based on improved skills and education. And so the gap of power widened from 1800 to 1950. We call it the era of economic divergence. So the world divided between the so-called developed and developing countries. So it was a very, very brutal period up through the middle of the 20th century. Then Europe had 2 devastating civil wars, basically, World War I and World War II, 2 bloodbaths with the Great Depression in between. But after World War II, what had been that age of divergence gradually turned into an age of convergence. And by 1945, Europe was exhausted. The deaths and destruction were so vast that every energy was towards rebuilding rather than colonies. So one by one, the colonies became independent, free from the yoke of Britain, some because independence was granted and others because they fought wars of liberation. But between 1945, basically, and the 1970s, most of the European empires vanished. And one very important thing happened when that occurred. You now had independent nations, and just about the first thing that they did was introduce mass literacy and mass education. Suddenly, those economies were able to start developing. They were able to do things that their imperial masters had prevented them from doing.